Okay, today we're looking at one of the most unique paddles I've ever tested. It's called the R2 Nova from a company called Ronbus, and they describe it as a Gen 3 paddle, and they have a lot of good reasoning behind that label. Personally, I'm not sure I agree with that classification 100%, and we're going to talk all about it. However, the headline is that this paddle is not a cookie cutter paddle, and it has a lot of interesting design going into it that make it play way differently than your typical Gen 2 paddle. But before we get too far into the weeds, I wanted to let you know Ronbus is letting me give one of these babies away for free, so be sure to stick around until the end of the video to see how to enter. But if you want to get a head start, you can go ahead and subscribe and hit that notification bell. And now let's talk specs. The R2 Nova is a 16mm paddle. Its face is raw Toray T700 carbon fiber textured. The shape is standard. I would personally classify this as a Gen 2 paddle, and we'll talk more about why some folks might label it a Gen 3 paddle in a little bit, but it has a lot to do with what Ronbus describes as an edge grid around the perimeter of the paddle's polypropylene core. But it is thermoform, it's unibody, and it has edge foam. The core is polypropylene, once again with that edge grid. As for the dimensions, it's 16 by 8 inches. The head length is 11 inches. The handle length is 5.5 inches. The grip circumference is 4.125 inches. The weight is 7.9 ounces. The advertised swing weight is 106. The advertised twist weight is 6.59. And it does come with a 6-month manufacturing defects warranty. As for price, it's $160 after you use promo code MatthewK for a $20 discount. And this paddle is USAP approved. Okay, so is the R2 Nova a Gen 3 paddle? I'm really not sure. There are no hard and fast rules when it comes to these categories, but for me, I've been classifying Gen 3 paddles as paddles that go through thermoforming but have non-traditional cores, like the Gearbox Pro paddle, where it's not honeycomb in the interior of the paddle, but a pretty complex system of foam and carbon fiber ribs. And then I also group paddles that do have traditional honeycomb cores as Gen 3 when they also include foam inside the paddle's interior beyond the typical edge foam seen in almost all Gen 2 paddles. And to my knowledge, the R2 Nova has a normal polypropylene core, one that hasn't been injected with or includes additional sections of foam. But what is different here is that Ronbus has added what they're calling an edge grid to the perimeter of the paddle surrounding the core. And more than anything, that's supposed to alleviate the issue of core crushing, which has plagued a number of Gen 2 paddles in the past. With the R2 Nova's edge grid design, pressure is supposed to be released during the manufacturing process, which is supposed to prevent this problem from ever happening. And if all this sounds like a foreign language, here's a quick breakdown. Old school pickleball paddles, which most people call Gen 1 paddles, are constructed pretty simply. You have a core that gets sandwiched between some face material, and it's all glued together and wrapped up and secured with an edge guard. Gen 2 paddles, however, are different because they added a carbon fiber seam around the core that would then get hot pressed, so all that material would get baked into a single piece, meaning a thermoform paddle isn't being held together solely with glue and an edge guard like Gen 1 paddles. Its face material and core material are one single object that's fully adhered together and connected after it's cooked, which typically results in a crisper, harder hitting paddle. But there is one problem with this manufacturing process, and that's that it often leads to paddles that would eventually get core crush. Here's an image of a core crush paddle. And this is a problem because once the walls of the honeycomb cells inside the paddle's core crush and crinkle like that, you end up with a paddle that's out of spec and would be illegal for tournament play because it hits much harder than is allowed. That's a bit of an oversimplification, but it gives you a good idea. But what's a bit new to this equation is that lots of folks, including Chris Olsen over at Pickleball Studio, believe that Gen 2 paddles that experience core crushing are actually getting core crushed while still at the factory. It's less a durability issue and more of a flaw in the manufacturing process. And that's what Ronbus is trying to fix. So this paddle is made like a Gen 2 paddle. It is hot press, but they've added these holes to the edge seam that then gets fused to the face material and core that's supposed to let pressure out and be released as it's getting cooked. And Ronbus believes this innovation prevents the paddle from getting core crush. Time will tell if that's true, but it really seems like there's been a good amount of research and unique design work into this tech, so I'm pretty optimistic. Now, does all this make the R2 Nova a Gen 3 paddle? I'm still not convinced, to be honest. For me, I think I'll keep it in the Gen 2 bucket for right now, but what about you? Do you think the edge grid puts it in another category? Is this Gen 3 to you, or is this just a perfected Gen 2 design? Let me know what you think in the comments. But more importantly, what does this all mean for how the paddle plays? Well, I think the R2 Nova is one of the most unique feeling paddles I've ever hit with. I've talked about the difference between a dynamic and a linear paddle before in both my review of the Huda Viva Pro Gen 2 way back, as well as my more recent review on the Phantom Trinity, and I really do like thinking of paddles being in one of those two categories. So a linear paddle is a paddle that has the same feeling of output when you swing hard and the same feeling of output when you hit soft. So if you hit hard, the ball goes hard. If you hit soft, the ball goes the same amount of softness. It's linear for how much power goes into the hit with how much power goes out. Whereas a dynamic paddle's output isn't linear. It's much more nuanced and really takes getting a feel for it. And the output won't always match the input from swing to swing. So with the R1 Nova, I think it's got a ton of power baked into it out of the box. If you hit hard, the ball freaking flies. However, if you hit soft, it will hit super soft. But it's not in a linear way, in my opinion. The touch and feel are super unique and take some getting used to. I think it must be in part due to the edge grid. I feel there's an almost subtle accordion thing going on with the ball sinking into the paddle's face and/or core, especially when it's not being pushed off with a lot of force from a big swing. That is not at all like what I'm used to with paddles packing this much power. So if you really hold back and take your foot off the gas in the soft game, you have a good amount of dwell time with the ball sinking into the face that really lets you shape and target. Plus, the surface is top notch, so that helps as well. But once again, there's a lot of power baked into this paddle, which really comes through when you swing hard. I was testing the Honolulu J2K Pro at the same time as this one, and I say they're just about in the same category of power. However, the J2K Pro is a linear paddle, so it has a more traditional feel in the short game and has a level of pop that I had to mute with some tungsten. But for the R2 Nova, instead of adding weight, I'm able to adjust my input to get the output I want in the dinking and in the short game. This adjustment would have been super uncomfortable for me to achieve with a popular paddle like the J2K Pro, just because of my personal style and what I do intuitively. The R2 Nova though just has a really interesting dwell time. I think once again as a result of the accordion-like feel coming from that edge grid. It's just super interesting, and I was able to play my short game just fine once I got used to how it felt and what kind of power input was required. I guess to simplify it, you get exponentially more power when you hit hard, while the power swings way to the other side of the spectrum whenever you hit soft, where it's way more on the control side of things. So I know all this has been a little confusing, but I hope I've gotten across an idea of how I think this paddle plays. To be 100% honest, this really might be a paddle you have to try out for yourself to really get a sense of how it hits. To summarize though, I think the R1 Nova would be a great option for someone that wants two gears in their game. One where they access a ton of power for some crazy powerful baseline hits, or anywhere on the court really, and then a second gear where they can switch mentally to a super control-oriented game and dial their input down to get the output they want for the short game. But once again, that dwell time from the accordion feel means you won't necessarily need to add weight. I would say of all the standard paddles I've reviewed, this is probably the one that can hit the hardest. Yet somehow you can also still have a super controlled soft game if your mental game is there. But I will add that I've had a chance to get a few hits with Ronbus's R2 Pulsar effects, which is the same paddle as the Nova, but with the addition of a flex grid as part of its face. And that thing is like the R2 Nova on steroids. So if you want even more power and pop, you could also look at this one as well. Okay, I know this review was a little rambly, but this paddle is just super unique, and it's like nothing I've hit with before. I think it's one of the best standard paddles out right now, but I would say it's definitely geared for more advanced players. As for value, I do think $160 after promo code MatthewK knocks off 20 bucks is actually very reasonable for how unique and innovative this paddle is. Ronbus truly seems to be on the cutting edge with their tech, so I think it's definitely worth the price, and I really like seeing a company use some of their profits to invest in research and development. They're doing some really cool stuff and are definitely bringing value to the paddle space, in my opinion. As for the giveaway, all you need to do is like this video, subscribe to the channel, hit the notification bell, comment which paddle from Ronbus you'd like me to review next, and I think I know which one it's going to be, and then fill out the Google form in the description so I have a way to contact you if you win. That's it. The raffle will be in about a month, so be on the lookout for an email. Good luck. Also, real quick, I wanted to highlight some of the overgrips I've been using lately. They're from a company called Bodhi. You can get a pack of 4 for less than 10 bucks after you use promo code MatthewK, and I was just super surprised by how much I like them. I thought I was ride or die Turn a Mega Tack for forever because I always have loved having my hand pretty much glued to the paddle grip, but I've started to really like how Bodhi's Overgrips feel. They're less tacky than what I'm used to, but with a bit more cushion. And I've found them to perform and hold up really well. And I love durability and anything that lasts when it comes to pickleball, and that describes these Overgrips for sure. I'll be sure to leave a link in the description in case you want to check them out. Okay, that's all I've got. The R2 Nova really is a special paddle. I'll be sure to leave a link in the description for Ronbus' site. Don't forget to use promo code MatthewK for that $20 discount. Also leave some links and codes for some other cool paddles and paddle companies. Be sure to check those out. And I have that list of some of my favorite pickleball accessories down there in the description as well, so don't be afraid to click around. Using those links and codes does help me and helps the channel, so it's always appreciated. And please like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell. All of that helps me a ton as well. But most importantly, I hope you get to pickle soon, and just don't forget, it's about having fun.